on UNCDF's calls for expression of interest for catalytic loans and guarantees for builders of Tanzania's inclusive digital economy. My name is Andreas, and I'm working with UNCDF's Inclusive Digital Economies team based in New York. For the agenda of today's session, next slide, please, Caroline. We will start with an introduction about UNCDF and UNCDF in Tanzania, after which we will speak about UNCDF's investment mandate and use of financial instruments, following more specific information to go through about the expression of interest. Then the majority of the session will be spent in an open Q&A where you can ask questions. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type in the comments or Q&A sections, and we will take as many as possible during the Q&A open floor discussion part of the session. During that part, you will also have the opportunity to raise your hand and ask your question on the open floor. I would first like to now give the floor to my colleague, Carolyn Moreau, digital economy specialist at UNCDF Tanzania, to provide an introduction about UNCDF and UNCDF in Tanzania. Thank you again, everyone, for joining, and over to you, Caroline.
Thanks, Andreas, and hi, everyone, for joining. If before we get any further, everyone could type their name and organization's name in the chat box, that would help us just kind of record who's here if we need to follow up or anything. And I'm going to try to be brief because I think many of you know who UNCDF, who we are, and we want to really focus on this specific EOI and any questions. So with that, to jump in, the United Nations Capital Development Fund has a unique mandate within the UN system, one that places us at a crossroads between a development agency and a development finance institution. We're the UN's development finance arm, primarily serving the world's 46 least developed countries. We work primarily with public and private sectors, and this capital mandate is as old as UNCDF, which means we have significant experience supporting enterprises in multiple sectors and at various growth stages, customizing support through a mix of technical assistance, grants, and increasingly other financial instruments such as loans, guarantees, and equity investments, and market research and advocacy kind of complement these capital investments in TA. We take a market systems development approach to building inclusive digital economies. And this entails intervening through 4 complementary work streams or pillars of the digital economy. These are enabling policy and regulations, inclusive innovation, empowered customers, and open digital payment ecosystem. Across each of these 4 work streams, we have 5 strategic instruments that we employ: customer centricity, data and research, stakeholder engagement, technical advice and training, and de-risking financial instruments. And while this call for expression of interest in catalytic concessional loans and guarantees kind of highlights that last strategic instrument, it's worth noting, and I think you can see here that does not occur in a vacuum. So we seek to invest in customer-centric products and services and companies that utilize or have the potential to utilize data and research and technology to improve their impact, and in entities generally that promote the development of the inclusive digital economy. So in Tanzania specifically, over the last 10 years and more, UNCDF has worked with partners to connect thousands of people, households, communities, especially at the last mile, to financial services, both formal and informal, traditional and digital. Today, our strategy focuses on building upon those gains, recognizing the huge potential for digital transformation, both in the financial sector and in connecting the financial sector to other sectors of the economy to impact many more lives. So we are engaging across the 4 work streams, partnering with policymakers and regulators, the private sector, and other development stakeholders to develop policies, infrastructure, tools, services that ensure all Tanzanians, especially the most vulnerable and those at the last mile, enjoy increased access to and usage of digitally enabled services. And our program is designed with a view towards supporting the government to realize its objectives, Vision 2025 and FYDP3, which both call for the use of technology to promote economic growth and transformation. And as a UN agency, we're also supporting the Tanzania's contribution to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. These are just some of our partners as an example. We couldn't put all of them on this slide, but as you can see, we work with and align with a number of government agencies, other UN agencies, the private sector, and other governments for funding. So with that, I will pass it to my colleagues.
Thanks, Caroline. I will pass it to Rhino to speak a little bit about, to continue speaking a little bit about our investment mandate and the investment continuum we offer to organizations.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. So I'm Rhino Bijleveld. I'm with our investment platform here at UNCDF. So I thought I'd just share a slide or two around the investment continuum. So the kind of support interventions that we play and the role we play in terms of in the investment space. Our sources of intervention start with, let's say, the most developmental, and this is typically in the form of a grant. So it's the most developmental in that it is very much a one-way contribution for a project to be supported or to be developed. Typically, these interventions happen in a very early stage. So typically a business and startup, R&D kind of costs. So it's very early on. When our counterparts or opportunities progress a little bit further, we change the intervention to start becoming more, let's say, let's call it sustainable or more commercial-like, in that it changes from a pure grant offering to a loan or guarantee offering that is still considered concessional in terms of the market, both in terms of interest rates, collateral requirements, and the stage of intervention. We typically house that under something we call the UNCDF Bridge Facility. Now, as the counterpart or opportunity progresses in terms of maturity, we have a vehicle called the Build Fund. Now, the Build Fund is now a further step up on the investment continuum that is closer to commercial funding, but not yet commercial funding. So typically there you might see interest rates that more closely align to, let's say, commercial funding available, but might still be able to offer slightly better terms in terms of collateral requirements, in terms of, let's say, number of years of operation. So it's still a step between more concessional funding and the pure commercial funding. And then ultimately, our goal is to progress opportunities all the way that they become what we consider bankable for commercial funding. And this is typically banks in the local market or impact funds or international capital markets. So that's the kind of journey we aim to walk with many of our opportunities that we support. Of course, we acknowledge that it's not purely, or counterparts don't just need support when it comes to funding. There's oftentimes a lack of capacity, perhaps some skill shortages. And in this way, we also aim to support our partner entities with some technical assistance, which is just a term we use in the development space for a bit of consultancy work to help and develop our counterparts, sometimes let's say governance structures or financial management or some product development. That's typically the support that we offer. And that really is the investment continuum and the way we intervene all the way from a grant all the way to maturity, ultimately our partners reaching the bankability stage in the operation. Perhaps I can just touch on our next slide, just around some of the principles we apply when we do consider investment, and very much we adhere to the OECD DAC blended finance principles. And I'm going to just highlight a couple of points that we aim to achieve. Of course, our role or any intervention that we do, any counterpart that we support, has to be strongly aligned to the UNCDF strategic framework. So we've got core areas that we work on, and any intervention, of course, needs to be aligned with our strategic framework. Then we need to, when we develop and design the tool of intervention, it needs to have a low risk of market distortion. And this is really, we don't want to intervene in a market and with our intervention distort the market in such a way that other funders in the market actually stop existing, or other value chains in the market stop existing because of our intervention. And a further principle that we aim is we want to develop the market. So in many aspects, we would perhaps intervene where local banks might not yet provide funding in a certain sector, and we'd like to show them almost through, be it a guarantee or some pilot programs, that actually some of these opportunities are bankable, and through that develop the market ultimately for the commercial space to sustain these development. And then lastly, it's important that we are additional. And additionality pretty much means that we don't want to play in a space where there's already finance providers that would be willing to support the opportunity. We need to be additional. So we need to be able to demonstrate that there is no solution yet in the local market to service opportunities. So those are just some of the principles. Questions that we typically get around our investment principles, and I think I'll just mention them already at this stage, is questions around, so what is your interest rate and what's your collateral requirement, and how long would you provide funding? Now, this is my typical cheeky response is, how long is a piece of string? Because it is very opportunity dependent, situation dependent. We do a detailed analysis of each opportunity. We've got an internal risk scoring model that kind of guides the offer that we can put forward, both in terms of interest rates, both in terms of tenors and collateral requirements. So it's very much a case-by-case evaluation on each project. So I just thought I throw that in because I know I typically get a question around these aspects. Thank you. We can move forward.
Great. And then just before we move forward, Andreas, is this recording being, is this presentation being recorded?
Yeah, it's being recorded, and also the slides will be shared. Both the recording and the slides will be shared.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rhino. So we will continue to speak more about the UNCDF's investment agenda using loans and guarantees. We see these financial instruments as additional tools to support our inclusive market development agenda around the inclusive digital economies. To pursue this, we are looking at a few categories as target enterprises for these investments to fulfill this mission. These fall broadly into three categories. The first one being tech companies or enterprises with tech-driven, digitally enabled business models across finance and digital innovation, agriculture value chains, and green economy and clean energy sectors. The second one being financial service providers, including financial institutions and non-bank financial institutions. and the third one being small and medium enterprises that not necessarily currently have a tech-driven, digitally enabled business model, but that can leverage use of technology to improve efficiency, organizational performance, and customer outreach across finance, green economy and clean energy, and agriculture. And all these investments are intended to contribute to market development, to building inclusive digital economies, particularly for vulnerable segments, including women, youth, micro, small, and medium enterprises, and migrants, and unlock further semi-commercial or commercial financing through the investment continuum that Raino explained as well. Next slide, please. So this expression of interest aims to collect information of prospects for UNCDF to issue loans and guarantees that contribute towards building inclusive digital economies in Tanzania. The investment instruments offered are in two categories. The first one being concessional lending and guarantees from UNCDF's own balance sheet through the bridge facility in the range between 100,000 and 250,000 US dollar, available in local currency. And that is offered on concessional terms, including interest rates, tenor, and collateral requirements. And the second investment instrument we're talking about today is the semi-commercial lending and equity investments through the Build Fund, which is the third-party managed off-balance sheet solution in the range between 250,000 and $2.5 million, available in local currency. The suitable investment will depend on the financial needs and risk return profile of the organization, as well as funding availability. And the investments will come together with a technical assistance facility component with tailored pre-investment and post-investment technical assistance as required. Next slide, please. UNCDF will assess applicants' potential for investment according to set eligibility and organizational, financial, and impact shortlisting and evaluation criteria. Some of the eligibility criteria for this expression of interest include being a formally registered entity, should offer a tech-driven, digitally enabled product or service, or be able to leverage such technology to improve efficiency, organizational performance, and customer outreach, be operating in one of the target sectors, and have minimum 1 year of audited financial statements, or be in the process of obtaining audited financials. For the shortlisting and evaluation criteria, UNCDF will review the profile, experience, and the team of the organization, the social impact, degree of innovation, and the impact on SDGs, among others. The full list of these is in the expression of interest document. And if you have any specific questions regarding this, please type them in the comment or Q&A box, and we will answer them as we go along and in the Q&A part of the session. Next slide, please. Now for some information on the submission process. In order to submit an entry, you can fill out the form on the UNCDF e-investment apply platform. On this platform, once you have assigned a name to your application, you first fill out an eligibility screening form. If you pass the eligibility screening, you'll be able to proceed with filling out the main application form. And the option to fill this main application form will appear on the application page if you pass the eligibility screening form requirements. And the link to the application form is here on the screen, and also in the expression of interest document and UNCDF website for this expression of interest. The submission deadline is 10th of June, and this call for expression of interest is an open-ended call with reoccurring quarterly deadlines until under 1 year. The deadline for the first quarterly assessment is 10th of June, and you can submit information under the call after this deadline, but your entry will be assessed on an ongoing basis. In order to make sure you are assessed in the first round, you should submit your entry by 10th of June. And then UNCDF will follow its investment management process while assessing applicants' potential for investment. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes the investment management process that UNCDF use. I won't go into further details on this. The process is also mentioned in the expression of interest document. If you have any specific questions regarding this, please type them in the comment or Q&A box, and we will answer them as we go along and in the Q&A part of the session. Next slide, please. So the next steps would be to complete the submission using UNCDF's Apply platform. And as mentioned, the deadline for the first quarterly submission is 10th of June. So next one would be, we will go into the open floor discussion and open Q&A. Caroline and I will now monitor the questions in the comment and the Q&A sections, and also checking if any hands are raised to ask in the open floor as well. So Caroline, are there any questions so far in the chat that maybe we can take here?
No, I don't see anything in the chat yet. So other than the confirmation that this recording will be shared and the slides will be shared. So if anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat box. Andrew raised your hand, so please go ahead.
Hi, Caroline. Thanks for this webinar, really informative. Wanted to ask if you have applied, let's say, for the June 10th submission, and then have not been able, were not approved for funding, but were given feedback for certain areas possibly to improve on. Are you then eligible to work on those areas and then reapply for a later submission date?
Should I take this one?
Yes, go ahead. Thanks.
Yeah. So I would think we shortlist the applicants that we think are in line with our inclusive digital economy strategy and what we are looking for in terms of shortlisting and evaluation criteria. So if you are shortlisted, we will get in touch and then collect more information from you, etc. So if you are not shortlisted, we won't be able to proceed at that point in time with your application. So I would say it's not it's generally not possible to reapply, but that we only get in touch with the potentials that we see the highest alignment with the criteria that we are looking for. So I hope that would answer your question.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Thanks, Andreas, and thanks, Andrew, for the question. Next question in the chat box from Zadok Prescott. What is the process and timeline? So I think the kind of the detailed investment management process is in that EOI document. So I won't kind of go through each specific step, but in generally in terms of the timeline. Right now is the time and opportunity for folks to complete the expression of interest through the apply platform. And then in that time, UNCDF evaluation team will be going through those and doing the initial assessment and shortlisting of applicants. And then applicants who are shortlisted will be contacted for kind of further engagement and assessment, more kind of detailed criteria around the organization, plan for use of funds, and eventually, if you get to the next stage, a kind of more formal and in-depth financial due diligence. In terms of timeline, the kind of general, it depends, it will vary, but in part on the number of applicants and also on a number of things, but typically from sourcing, so from where we're at now to disbursement, can take between 4 and 6 months. Ideally, after the first application deadline, if you're shortlisted, you'll hear from us between 1 and 3 months, but that can vary. So don't it's not a hard timeline. And then also just to say that you will hear from us if you're shortlisted, but we can't guarantee that we'll be able to contact all applicants if they are not shortlisted. Andreas, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think you covered it all. Okay,
does that answer the question? Or you can raise your hand if there's another one. I guess it's kind of hard to, I think everyone's on mute. Yes, great. Okay. Tony Misokia, how many submissions can one entity share? That is a good question. I'll try and then my colleagues can correct me, but at this stage, there's not the application doesn't entail a plan for the use of funds or kind of a specific business proposal. So really you're applying as your entity, not as a proposal for the use of funds. So I'm going to say you should do one application. Is that correct, Andreas? Or right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So just one, no need to create more work at this stage for yourself. Alfred Semo, how much equity percentage does UNCDF usually aim to get in the range of 250,000 and 2.5 million? Is there a minimum rate? I'm going to say the minimum, but I'll give it to my colleagues.
So
yeah.
Perhaps I'm happy to just give some guidance. So it very much does depend on the kind of intervention we would put forward in terms of our continuum. Is it more of a bridge intervention, which is earlier stage, or more of a build intervention? When it comes to bridge, we don't necessarily have absolute minimums, but we of course do want to make sure that there is alignment of interest. So it can't be that your intervention or your business is fully debt funded without equity. When it becomes more, moves more to a build intervention, and this is typically the space of this 250K to 2.5 million. There again, it depends on the stage of the business. Typically, when it's earlier stage, the minimum requirements are at least $100,000 and north. When it is more of a growth or expansion stage, the opportunity. So typically, when the ticket sizes gets larger, then there's at least a 15% equity to asset contribution required. Again, these aren't hard rules. In some cases, the requirement might be set higher. This very much does depend on the opportunity.
Thanks, Rhino. Okay, next question I'm going to go to from Corinne. Regards to minimum facility amount for bridge finance is USD 50K strict minimum. Most microfinance clients may need less than that minimum. I'll start and say I think that is a minimum. I think the purpose would it likely be lending to a microfinance clients, but rather in this case, lending to you as the MFI for either in the form of a guarantee or a loan for onward lending, or for, you know, developing some sort of product or service that can help you further your impact. Rhino or Andreas, anything else to add to that?
I think that was clear and a good answer. I don't have anything particular to add on that.
Okay. I'm going to move to the Q&A because now I'm seeing there's the chat box and the Q&A. Okay, so the first one, Corinne, I think that answered. Norbert, based on the insights, I'm targeting women-led SMEs across Africa. Should the application be limited to only Tanzania? So in terms of Tanzania, I mean, it's a requirement that you are an entity registered in Tanzania and operating in Tanzania. I don't think that if you are also operating in other countries in East Africa or West Africa across the continent, that would exclude you. I think during the kind of shortlisting, further assessment would be the time in which the UNCDF evaluation team assessment committee would work with you to better understand how your business targets women in Africa versus Tanzania. Is that correct? You must be operating in Tanzania and registered in Tanzania. And I think we hope that your loan would target Tanzania, but as an organization, if you're also operating outside Africa, that's not an exclusionary criteria. I hope that answers that question. How many submissions can one entity submit? Okay, so I think we've answered that. That's one. If the other submissions are in partnership or in other potential areas. So we can't do joint applications for this. So it's just as one entity, and again, later on would be conversations around the plan for use of funds.
And I think those are case-by-case basis. There are some joint applications that could be, for example, one fintech together with a financial service provider using for example, a particular credit scoring mechanism to improve loans, and the financial service provider would like to have a guarantee and also use the credit scoring mechanism from the fintech. So it would be kind of a partnership application, but in that case, one of the entities should make the application on behalf of the other. So it would be one entity making the application. So we don't do joint applications at this time.
Great, thanks. Move on. Thank you for your time and interactive session. You're welcome. What are you considering a buyover? 2, for financial institutions that have frozen asset due to the post-COVID impact, what are the considerations for such financial institutions? 3, what are the collateral to be considered for your bridge finance? I'll start with 3 and say there is not necessarily a collateral requirement, but all of the terms of the loan are going to depend on the applicant, their financial needs, risk return profile, and our funding available. Can Andreas or Rhino answer 1 and 2?
Perhaps Rhino, you can add on that.
Yes, so on the collateral requirement, it's very operations specific or opportunity specific. It would be good to just elaborate what you imply with buyover and frozen assets. If I don't know if this is a country specific point, but if this is potentially assets that you can't recover on because you had to give, let's say, restructuring or capital grace because of the pandemic, I'm not 100% sure. So I'd be happy if you could just perhaps type in or just raise your question so that we just better understand the terms of frozen assets here and buyover, please.
Feel free to unmute yourself and just elaborate here if you can.
Or just raise your hand and then we can unmute. I don't think anyone can speak freely at the moment. Are there any other questions in the chat or Q&A in the meantime?
Yeah, let me move on. Okay. How can incubators and accelerators partner with the bridge and build facilities?
So right now we are not we are targeting enterprises with revenue generating business models. So if that's aligned with your organization, I think that could be very relevant. But if it's not aligned with that, I don't think it would be eligible under this call.
I mean, if you have enterprises that you have kind of partnered with that are also eligible in your network, and you can refer them to this, that's also appreciated.
Yeah, definitely.
Are the facilities registered as entities in the country? So if I'm understanding this question, or maybe I'll just reframe it and say that an eligibility requirement is that you must be a registered entity in Tanzania and operational in Tanzania. So you can't be operational in Tanzania but registered in a foreign country. That is for this EOI an exclusionary criteria. Let's see. If an entity is less than a year old, but team members have 10 plus years experience and a compelling solution, will the entity be considered for bridge funding?
I think in that specific case, I mean, we would have to do case by case basis, and I don't think we can give a very clear answer without having more information. But we do look for a little bit of history, and as you see, one of the criteria is at least in the process of obtaining audited financial statements. And as my colleagues were saying earlier in the session as well, we have an investment continuum where each of the financial instruments is supposed to play a part, and maybe in the case of this example, a grant perhaps would be more relevant. But of course, this is not a grant opportunity, so maybe that would be in another opportunity. But in this case, we do look for some kind of established organizations that is revenue generating and that needs further support for growth.
Great. So I think to summarize the answer is, not necessarily you won't not necessarily be excluded so long as you are in the process of obtaining the first year of financial statements. Although I think we are looking for established people and teams. So feel free to apply. Okay, I'm going to move back to the chat box. Entity shall have 1 year audited financials means that the business should be in active operations, preferably with positive revenue for more than 1 year, right? So this means pre-revenue companies are likely to not be considered.
Right.
Sorry, did you want to answer that?
No, I just said right.
Oh, correct. Okay. All right. Is it the same process for different funding types mentioned earlier? You apply with funding required, and UNCDF will filter and apply the relevant investment type available. Or are there different application processes for the different investment types described? Yes, so it's the same process. At the end of the last section of the EOI application asks what type of funding is desired or needed, but that is an optional question. So you do indicate the type and amount of funding that you would, but it is also the evaluation team and assessment investment committee that determines the suitable type of investment amount, terms, etc. Anything else to add, Rhino or Andreas?
I think that's fair. Typically, if the requirement is larger, i.e., north of 250,000, this typically puts you more in the build frame or the build intervention, which tends to be more or closer to commercial funding. Where if it's less than 250,000, it's possible to still consider the opportunity under the bridge window, which tends to be more concessional. But we do, of course, evaluate each opportunity on a case-by-case basis to see what the best solution or intervention would be.
Thanks. Okay, what instruments does UNCDF use? Safes, convertible notes. This is for the equity component. I'll turn that to you, Rhino.
Okay, so our interventions in this space is very much focused around debt. With that being said, we are in cases able to consider subordinated debt, which does, let's say, play almost like an equity layer or equity role. We are also able to consider guarantees to local financial institutions or international investors. So yes, we can play that subordinated role, but it is more of a debt nature. And I think that's also why it's difficult for us to intervene with this product in a pre-revenue state, because if we are offering debt or subordinated debt, one needs to be able to consider what a repayment structure would look like. And pre-revenue, it's very, very difficult to even forecast such assumptions. So that's why we also intervene more in a post-revenue, perhaps pre-profit stage of intervention.
Rhino, can you elaborate a little bit on the equity opportunities under build?
So there are equity opportunities under build, but these are typically quite limited and very much on a case-by-case basis. The build fund is predominantly focused on debt, but in cases where there is opportunity, I think the preference would normally then be convertible or pref shares, but this is very much on a case-by-case basis.
Thanks. Okay, a couple more from Alfred. Thanks for all the questions. Deal sourcing. UNCDF is likely to face not such a populous pipeline in Tanzania. By experience, hopefully this is not the case. Agreed. If that appears to be so, has the team thought of scout programs to get the word out and help more companies apply? I think this is something that perhaps we could even talk offline about. I think we welcome feedback in terms of how to get the word out for things like this and ensure that as many people as possible are aware of this call for expression of interest and aware of what we're doing. Debt, in the event the company goes bust, what happens? How do you collateralize the debt? Rhino?
So we would go through the assessment of the underlying transaction, and then we would seek the required collaterals and guarantees that we require for the intervention. And then depending on what the kind of collateral and security is that one will hold, one will seek to execute it as such. There's not necessarily a one size fits all. It also depends on whether we co-finance on transactions, whether we're a guarantor or a lender. There's not an exact process or exact science to this. It very much depends on what we agree contractually on the transaction.
Great. Thank you. Let me go back to, okay, that's good. Thanks for the webinar. Do you have any active grant opportunities available at the moment? We do have a request for applications to join its newly launched PESA Tech Accelerator, which is an accelerator in in partnership with Sahara Ventures and Enea Advisors and a few other partners. I believe that deadline, I think it's coming soon, so I would just check, and you can also check on our website, and feel free to email me separately, or I can follow up offline with the deadline. What is the minimum equity stake with the Build fund consider? So Build is in the range of 250,000 to 2.5 million. My first question on whether the Build and Bridge facilities are registered in Tanzania was not answered. Typically, there are different tax implications that may be considered. Okay, I think perhaps I answered it the wrong way. The entities must be registered in Tanzania, where Build and Bridge registered.
The bridge is done under the United Nations treaties, so it's not registered in a country itself. It operates under the UN treaties with the respective countries. Build is registered in Luxembourg.
Great. Suppose an entity is at an early stage, not eligible up to your requirements. Is there a readiness program available under your banner to mentor and prepare startups? Yes, please Google the Pace Attack Accelerator, which, as I just mentioned, is a new accelerator launched with Sahara Ventures in Tanzania. I'm just pulling up the application, and it's for kind of post MVP and post revenue startups. And I just don't want to get the deadline wrong because I know it's very soon, but you can Google it, and if I find it on multiple screens here, but yeah, please Google that. And look for stuff upcoming, because all right. I don't see any more in the chat right now. Oh, what metrics does the UNCDF team have? Can you elaborate on that? Metrics on what? On ourselves? On you? Ticket sizes and impact. So do you mean on other in investments that have been done by Bridge and Build to date?
So I think he might be referring to the regular indicators that would track for the investment.
Okay. What
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, we as part of the loan or guarantee or financial instrument agreement, we would agree on development impact and financial indicators to follow up on a regular basis. And for the development impact indicators, it includes, it depends on the sector that the investment is in, but the regular ones would be job creation and number of clients, outreach, and then there would be quite a lot sector-specific indicators depending on which what type of investment it is.
Thank you.
And then he's asking if we could share them. It's not something that is shareable at the moment, and it's set depending on each investment. So it will be specific to each investment.
Thanks. And just to answer the question I was speaking about before about other applications. The applications for the PESA Tech Accelerator are due the 31st of May. So look for that. And if you have questions about that, we can discuss those separately offline. Feel free to reach out. Okay. I would like to know if my organization has applied and succeeded under the first category. After completion of the facility, can we apply under second category, semi-commercial lending? What is the process? Does it require your EOI? So it's one EOI, and based on your application, your entity's profile, financing needs, risk return profile, etc., as well as UNCDF's funding, will determine if you're eligible for a bridge facility investment, or you would be referred to for a build investment. So it's just one application at this stage. Okay, I see we have 5 minutes left. So is there a maximum number of entities you wish to provide this facility to? No, again, it will depend on the pool of applicants and available funding. How do we determine interest rates? Is there a profit initiative by UNCDF? This is for debt. I think Rhino can speak to how they're determined, but it's going to be dependent and vary case by case in terms of what the rate is.
Yes, so correct. It depends on the term, the structure, and the risk profile. But there is not a profit motif in our operations. There's always a subsidy component compared to the market when we do intervene.
Thanks. Can I share the link for the PESA Tech Accelerator program? Sure, let me see if I can pull it up in the remaining time. Otherwise, I'll send a note. Keisha, thank you. Safe to assume it would be at least half commercial rates in Tanzania per year.
I'm not able to tell you what the absolute rate would be. It's very much assessed on the opportunity by opportunity case. And sorry, I know it feels like a politician not saying exactly what you're asking, but it's really dependent on the opportunity. It's not something that we can set at the early on stage.
Yeah, and it's never safe to assume anything. All right. See any final thoughts, questions? Again, you can feel free to send any further questions. Really, please feel free to. Thanks, Paul. To reach out via the email that's eoi.tanzania@uncdf.org, and we'll answer specific questions to the best of our ability. Yes, great. Deadline is May 31st for the PESA Tech Accelerator, and the first deadline for this is for this EOI is June 10th. So a few different things, but they are different. So please keep those deadlines in mind. All right, I guess it's fairly quiet. Oh, Tony. Go ahead.
I was asking about is there any specific number of entities that you are looking forward to provide this facility to? Is it like if we apply 100, and all of the 100 qualify, will all be given the support? Or we will still select a few that you wish to work with?
Yeah, no, it's there is no hard answer there either. I think it depends on the pool of applicants as well as the funding available. So it might be, you know, fewer applicants with larger loans or many with a smaller amount. It really depends on the profiles, the pools of applicants that we get, their financing needs and funding available on UNCDF's side. Great, thanks, Evans. We look forward to seeing your application and hopefully applications from all of you as well.
So I think we can close the webinar now. I think time is up. But if you have any further questions, please reach out on the email on the screen.
Great. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.